Disclaimer: this video is a historical documentary created for educational purposes. All scenes are artistic reenactments based on documented events. No real violence is shown or promoted. The William Wallace you've probably seen in movies is a national hero. He's a symbol of freedom who fights for his people with his face painted blue, crying freedom on the battlefield and on the executioner's block. But the real history is a much darker, more complicated story. It's a story about a man so driven by revenge that his brutality was shocking. Even for the medieval world, the heroic tale you know is only half of it. The other half is far more savage. From the grisly trophies he allegedly made from his enemy's skin to the horrific revenge the English would inflict upon him, this is the story of what can happen when a hero decides he has to become a monster to fight other monsters. This is the real story of William Wallace's brutal revenge. To understand the rage that fueled William Wallace, you have to understand the world he was born into. At the end of the 13th century, Scotland was a kingdom in chaos. After its king died without an heir, England's powerful monarch, Edward I, a man known as Longshanks, seized his chance. He invaded, declared himself overlord, and bled the Scottish people dry with crippling taxes and garrisons of English soldiers. Resistance was simmering just beneath the surface, but it needed a spark. That spark would be lit by an act of profound violence. Now, the most enduring story, popularized by later poems and, of course, the movie Braveheart, points to the murder of his wife, Marion Braidfute. Legend says the English sheriff of Lanark, William de Cressingham, executed her. But it's important to know that's almost certainly just a legend. There's no contemporary evidence Wallace was even married. Still, what we do know for a fact is that in May of 1297, Wallace's rebellion exploded into history when he hunted down and killed that same English sheriff in Lanark. This wasn't just a random act, it was part of a series of uprisings happening across Scotland. But Wallace's brutal and personal attack made him stand out. With that single act, Wallace crossed a line. He was no longer just a man wronged by an invading army. He was an avenger, and his campaign had just begun. He would make it his mission to inflict staggering pain upon the English occupation. After killing the sheriff, Wallace was a wanted man, an outlaw. But in a country suffering under English rule, one man's outlaw is another's freedom fighter. He gathered a band of men and began a guerrilla war, targeting English officials and soldiers. His name started spreading like wildfire, a symbol of vengeance haunting the English occupation. His campaign reached its peak on September 11th, 1297, at the Battle of Stirling Bridge. Wallace, now allied with another rebel leader, Andrew Moray, faced a massive English army. The English force of thousands of infantry and cavalry felt confident, almost arrogant. To engage the much smaller Scottish force, they had to cross a narrow wooden bridge over the River Forth. This was the moment Wallace was waiting for. He demonstrated incredible patience, holding his men back as the English soldiers slowly filed across the bridge, maybe only 2 or 3 abreast. When about half the army was across, trapped in a loop of the river, Wallace gave the signal. The Scots charged down with unbelievable fury. The English soldiers were packed in with the river at their backs and nowhere to run. The Scottish spearmen formed impenetrable walls of wood and steel called schiltrons, slaughtering the English who had no room to maneuver. The attack was so violent that the English soldiers still on the other side of the bridge began to panic. What happened next is debated by historians. Some accounts say the bridge, overloaded with men, splintered and collapsed, sending hundreds of armored soldiers plunging into the river to drown. Others believe the Scots simply cut off the escape route, trapping and annihilating those who had crossed. Either way, it was a total disaster for the English, with estimates of up to 5,000 dead. But it's what happened after the battle that reveals the personal, brutal nature of this conflict. Among the dead was one of the most hated men in Scotland. Hugh de Cressingham, Edward I's treasurer, despised for the ruthless taxes he imposed. To Wallace's men, he was a symbol of their suffering. Medieval chronicles report that after the battle, they flayed his body, peeling the skin from his flesh. It's said the Scottish soldiers cut this skin into small pieces as gruesome tokens of their victory. But according to the Lanarcost Chronicle, Wallace kept a special piece for himself, a broad strip of Cressingham's skin taken from head to heel to be made into a belt for his sword. Now, think about that. The leader of the Scottish rebellion was said to be wearing the skin of his enemy. This wasn't just war. It was psychological terror, a horrifying message to King Edward about the fate awaiting those he sent to rule Scotland. When news of the disaster at Stirling and the mutilation of Cressingham's body reached King Edward I, he was furious. Wallace's victory and the savagery that followed were a personal insult. Edward, a ruthless and brilliant military commander himself, decided he would lead an army north to crush the rebellion personally. The cycle of revenge was about to escalate. In July 1298, Edward confronted Wallace at the Battle of Falkirk. This time, there was no narrow bridge to give the Scots an advantage. On an open field, Edward's superior numbers and his devastating formations of longbowmen proved decisive. The Scots were slaughtered, and Wallace's army was shattered. He managed to escape, but his reputation as an invincible warrior was broken. He resigned as Guardian of Scotland and became a fugitive. King Edward I was willing to forgive many of the other Scottish nobles who had rebelled, but not Wallace. In Edward's eyes, Wallace wasn't a soldier to be ransomed or a noble to be pardoned. He was a war criminal who had to be made an example of. For the next 7 years, Wallace was a hunted man, moving across Scotland and even into Europe, always trying to stay one step ahead of his pursuers. The king's desire for revenge was absolute. For years, William Wallace evaded capture. But in August 1305, his luck ran out. He was betrayed by a Scottish nobleman, John de Menteith, and captured near Glasgow. Handed over to English soldiers, his fate was sealed. There wasn't going to be any mercy. He was transported hundreds of miles to London for a show trial at Westminster Hall on August 23, 1305. It was pure political theater. There was no jury and no real chance for him to defend himself. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. When charged with high treason, Wallace famously declared he could not be a traitor to King Edward because he had never sworn allegiance to him. The defense was ignored. The sentence was already decided, to be hanged, drawn, and quartered, the most horrific public execution imaginable, designed not just to kill, but to utterly destroy a person. The punishment began at once. Wallace was stripped naked, tied to a wooden frame, and dragged by horses for miles through the streets of London, from the Tower to Smithfield, all while being jeered by the crowds. At Smithfield, the real horror began in front of a festival-like atmosphere. Wallace was hanged by the neck, but cut down while he was still alive. Conscious and gasping for air, he was then pinned down. While still alive, the executioner mutilated him, then sliced open his abdomen and slowly pulled out his bowels and internal organs, throwing them into a fire before his eyes. Only after this unimaginable agony was he finally beheaded. But even then, it wasn't over. His body was hacked into 4 pieces. The king's revenge was cold and calculated. Each part of Wallace's body was sent as a message. His head was dipped in tar to preserve it and impaled on a spike on London Bridge. His 4 limbs were sent to be publicly displayed in Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, and Perth, a terrifying warning of the price of rebellion. King Edward thought the brutal public destruction of William Wallace would crush the Scottish rebellion for good. He believed that by turning a man into a monument of horror, he would terrify the Scots into submission He could not have been more wrong. The sheer cruelty of the execution backfired. Instead of extinguishing the rebellion, the horror of Wallace's death fanned it into an inferno. The man became a martyr. The story of his defiance and his horrific end became a rallying cry. He was no longer just a defeated guerrilla leader. He was now the embodiment of Scottish resistance, a national hero whose spirit couldn't be broken by the most barbaric punishment. Wallace's sacrifice inspired and re-energized men who had previously submitted to Edward, including a nobleman named Robert the Bruce. Where Wallace had ultimately failed on the battlefield, the Bruce would eventually succeed, galvanized by Wallace's memory. The gruesome display of Wallace's dismembered body didn't serve as a warning. It served as an inspiration. The fight for Scottish independence continued, more ferocious than ever, eventually leading to victory at the Battle of Bannockburn and the establishment of an independent Scotland. The story of William Wallace is a brutal reminder that history is rarely a simple tale of heroes and villains. To uncover more dark and shocking truths behind famous historical figures, make sure to subscribe and let us know in the comments. After hearing the whole story, do you see Wallace as a hero, a monster, or something in between? In the end, William Wallace's revenge was just as brutal as the oppression he was fighting, creating a devastating cycle of violence. He became a monster to fight monsters. But the English crown's revenge against him was so extreme, so utterly savage, that it guaranteed his immortality. King Edward I tried to erase William Wallace from history, but in trying to destroy the man so completely, he accidentally created a legend that would outlive the very empire he fought so desperately to protect.